Hey, what's going on, y'all? Welcome back to the Media Goose channel. It is I, the Media Goose, your friend Ryan, and the goose is loose, baby. Ha! I'm coming at you today to share my first video in a new series, MCU HOT Takes. I did a pro wrestling hot takes video, I think, already. Was that the hot takes video? I did some hot takes video, but I am finally coming in with my MCU hot takes. I feel like the MCU, the way people in like the 70s and 80s were reading comic books and like considered themselves comic book experts, that's how I feel about the MCU. I have been there since the beginning. I've seen every single film and project in the MCU multiple times, and I don't think that I coddle any projects. I'm really honest about stuff I don't enjoy. And even if I enjoy them based on my first reaction, I've kind of realized when I walk out of a movie theater, I'm very like taken in by all of it and like, oh my God. And then it's that like hour later where you're like, wait, that didn't make sense. And that didn't make sense. And I've gotten a lot better lately at, I don't know, grounding myself when I watch a movie instead of just like fully being swept up in it all. Sometimes I like to be swept up in it all, but some movies don't earn that. And this hot take, for my first hot take, this might be the most contentious hot take on this list. Spider-Man No Way Home sucked. And it's the worst Tom Holland Spider-Man movie. And it might be the second worst Spider-Man live-action movie ever. I think that it was a nostalgia fest. It was an incoherent nostalgia fest. I wrote some notes. Let me just make sure I stay on point. The first thing that I'll point out as, like, awful writing is the spell. The runes of Kafkal. The fact that Doctor Strange, before having a real conversation with Peter about the college thing, just casts a spell to wipe the memory of the world is ridiculous. It's terrible writing. Terrible. And in my opinion, this should have led to big consequences for Strange in Multiverse of Madness, and it didn't. That's another movie that I'm going to talk about in a few minutes. No Way Home is like the worst use of nostalgia I've ever seen. If it wasn't for, first off, when Toby and Andrew come in, they literally, in the movie, wrote in applause breaks. Like this is, I don't know, sometimes on Broadway shows, they have to do that when big stars walk in. You have to take a beat because the audience is losing it. You don't do that in fucking movies. And the undoing of those villains' arcs and deaths was totally short-sighted, and I don't know, I just didn't feel connected to any of the villains in this movie, least of all Green Goblin. I've never really been that impressed with Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. It's a little overacty and like he's chewing the fucking scenery. Like, I don't think it's that great. Alfred Molina is great. Michael Keaton is great. Jake Gyllenhaal is great. I don't really care for Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin. So this movie, in my opinion, would have been better if it was Peter's villains. Why does Peter have any kind of connection to that goblin? And how the fuck do you have Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin appear in this movie and never cross paths with Tobey Maguire? How? Tobey's my least favorite Spider-Man. I don't think he's even good as Spider-Man. I think he's bad. But to not have those two cross over was fucking idiotic. And then Tom is having this final fight with a character he met 30 minutes ago. If that's Michael Keaton's Vulture, who came back and killed Aunt May, If that's Jake Gyllenhaal's Mysterio who came back and killed Aunt May, if it's an evil Doctor Strange that came through the cracks in reality, and then that's the Doctor Strange in Multiverse of Madness, there's so many ways to make this movie better. And Lizard didn't belong in this movie at all. Ray Fiennes was literally never on set. It's all previously used digital effects. Jamie Foxx provided nothing. The only characters that had any real crucial elements to the plot are the Goblin and Doc Ock. It's a bad movie. I get it. Everybody likes shiny things, and even Daredevil's appearance felt like cameo fest crap. Like, it wasn't... There was more scenes with him they cut. Spider-Man No Way Home isn't a good movie, and I don't care if people come at me for it. I can look past the moments of, oh my god, Andrew Garfield, and realize, oh, this is an incoherent mess. And now, hot take number 2. Multiverse of Madness is also a terrible movie. It completely lied about the movie that it was in its marketing, saying that it was Doctor Strange versus an evil Doctor Strange. And it completely undid everything that Wanda experienced in WandaVision. At the end of WandaVision, Wanda realizes the effect she has had on the people of Westview and changes and makes these changes to make sure that these people are safe. And she exiles herself. And the fact that as soon as she exiles herself, they have her start using the fucking Darkhold. And then the next time we see her, she's this massive villain. I hate it. I also, the line that Wanda says, I use the Darkhold and I'm a villain. You use the Darkhold and you're a hero. She's completely right. This is a white savior movie. This is Doctor Strange as Jesus Christ coming to save a crazy woman. It's fucking dog shit. I don't care that, like, people wanted to see horror movie Wanda. I didn't. I wanted to see Wanda as a fucking hero. Fuck Multiverse of Madness. I would have taken a Wanda Maximoff Scarlet Witch movie where she goes one-on-one with Chthon or Mephisto. Or Doctor fucking Strange. Because he is a privileged white guy who gets away with multiverse-altering fucking mistakes. And Wanda does one thing, and it's the end of the fucking world. This movie felt like a bunch of white men sitting in a room writing a fucking movie. And then, the fact that apparently at the end of WandaVision, Doctor Strange was going to show up. All of those hints from the commercials were teasing Doctor Strange showing up. And apparently Kevin Feige stepped in and said, no, I don't want Doctor Strange just showing up and showing Wanda how to do her powers and, like, I know better than you because I'm a man. But then you just fucking do it in the movie anyway. It was such a disservice to Wanda Maximoff and to Elizabeth Olsen. It completely undid the beautiful arc that she had in WandaVision. WandaVision, a project better than 90% of the MCU. This movie, the movie we got was completely different than the movie they advertised. The Illuminati was shit. The Illuminati was so bad it was cartoonish. That should have been a Council of Doctor Stranges, if you're going with the plot you're telling in this movie based on everything else Doctor Strange has done. It should have been a bunch of ego-driven Doctor Stranges in the same room, jerking each other off, and maybe then you can show our Doctor Strange going, hey, we're the fucking problem. And then he is different. But when America Chavez just going, he's different, I can tell. I just hated it. I hated it. And Sam Raimi's coming back for another Doctor Strange movie, and I hate that too. Because I like Sam Raimi, but it didn't fit for Doctor Strange. And I know that sounds weird because it's horror, so you would think those two things intrinsically fit. But in my opinion, the Doctor Strange in the MCU has been much more aligned to the magical sorcerer side of things than the dark and demonic. The dark and demonic is like Moon Knight, Elsa Bloodstone, Werewolf by Night, Blade. Who Blade is in the MCU. He was in Eternals. Yeah, so Multiverse of Madness, they lied to us about the movie in the way that they presented it. They lied to us about the villain. They totally undid everything about Wanda's beautiful story. It was terrible. I hated it. And the whole evil Strange misdirect, they intentionally made him look like the evil Doctor Strange from the What If series. You will never convince me that they didn't. They wanted us to think that the conclusion of What If was going to lead directly into Multiverse of Madness, because the Doctor Strange they created in What If could have been the villain of this movie easily. It would have made this a much better movie. And then Doctor Strange should have had to go to Wanda for help, because she is the most, and I cannot stress this enough, the most powerful character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. The only character potentially stronger than her, I would say, is Franklin Richards now. And that might not even be the case. If I had to guess, Franklin and Wanda will be Doctor Doom's two biggest tools in reforming Battleworld after he ends the multiverse in Doomsday. So those are my two hottest takes for sure. Now, this is a hot take that developed recently. There was a time period like last year sometime where a ton of websites started sharing their top 10 MCU movies. And a movie that appeared in that list really often and blew me away was Guardians of the Galaxy 2. That's a shit film. Like, I cannot stress enough how bad of a film Guardians of the Galaxy 2 is. The jokes are not as funny as 1 or 3. Drax, I feel like Drax is handled in this movie the way Zach Galifianakis was in The Hangover 2, where like you had something that was like lightning in a bottle, Zach Galifianakis' incredible comedy, and then you overdid it and wrote bad jokes. Honestly, it's kind of like Thor 4 in that way. Thor Ragnarok is the funniest movie in the MCU, and then Thor 4 tries to be funny and it fails. And I think Guardians 2 did a lot of that as well. The whole daddy issue storyline was so cringe because everybody and their fucking mother the entire time knew Ego was going to be the villain. The whole movie was crap, in my opinion. The final battle was bad. It was CGI schlop. Star-Lord, like, being so swept up in all of it, even though it's pretty obvious from the beginning how evil Ego is. There's a ton of exposition. The second act of the movie drags like hell. It's a bad movie. And to see people putting it in the top 10 of the MCU ahead of Guardians 3 blew my fucking mind. Because Guardians 1, as we'll come to find out, is a top 2 or 3 MCU movie for me. And Guardians 3, I've never ranked the MCU with Guardians 3 in it. It might be a top 10 MCU movie. It is heart-wrenching and maybe one of the darkest movies in the MCU in terms of the stuff we go over. So Guardians 2 is ass, and it blew my mind to see how many people thought it was really good. Next hot take. The multiverse saga in its entirety was a complete misstep. I don't know if it has to do with the fact that there was that big writer's strike with the pandemic. There was the pandemic that changed everything. The post-Endgame era, going into the multiverse, they just so improperly handled it. Nothing ever connected. I felt like the cool thing about the multiverse would be seeing characters react to people they thought were dead and like, oh, I'm from another unit, like those kind of interactions, and they never happened. It undid deaths. It undid like really important moments like Loki's death in Infinity War. The Loki we're about to see be like the lead of Doomsday isn't even our canonical Loki. Thanos died in Infinity War, back in Endgame. Captain Carter, they used in the Illuminati, and it was kind of pointless, and they cut her in half in a second. Gamora, they undid her, massive death, and then James Gunn had to fucking try to shoehorn this new Gamora into his universe. Maria Rambeau, like that moment with at the end of the Marvels, where it's Monica and her mom, and it's weird, and the fact that there's been no Avengers movie since Endgame in the multiverse saga. How the hell did they manage that? How? Who allowed that to continue to happen? To me, the most obvious show, I have another hot take about shows and movies and how they got those wrong so many times. The obvious moment that should have been an Avengers movie is Secret Invasion. Secret Invasion is a massive multi-part comic arc, and they made what is probably the worst project ever created under the Marvel umbrella in Secret Invasion. It was complete and utter, I don't even know what to call it, Sony? It was so bad it felt like Sony? It was horrendous. That should have been a movie. That should have been a film. Secret Wars. Avengers Secret Invasion. Where it could have started where at the end of Civil War, let's say, when Rhodey should have died. That's another hot take. Rhodey should have died at the end of Civil War. What if Rhodey turned into a Skrull then? Or there was a moment later in the MCU right before Secret Invasion where Rhodey died and he turned into a fucking Skrull. Or if at the end of Endgame, when Tony died, he turned into a fucking Skrull. Or if we saw Hank Pym or Howard Stark, somebody else in the older generation as a Skrull. It had so much possibility, and it was one of the worst things they ever did. How do you bring in Olivia Colman and not use her in a more meaningful way? It was like when they brought Sigourney Weaver into fucking The Defenders and then didn't put everything they could into it. So yeah, no Avengers movie since Endgame. The amount of dangling threads that never got picked up again, unaddressed storylines. There were celestial gods in the air and nobody cared. A celestial emerged from the ocean and nobody cared. There's just so many things I could point to. The rift that opened above New York City and nobody cared. The void that opened when the Void and Thunderbolts happened and there was no connectivity. That was what made Marvel amazing. Reviewing Phase 1 was so like, oh, look at all of the fucking ways they were always connecting this stuff. And as I'm about to get into Phase 2, arguably the phase where they perfected that, everything after Endgame is the antithesis, where nothing mattered, nothing connected. It feels like, I've used this comparison in the opposite way, but it feels like when Cody Rhodes beat Roman Reigns and then WWE sucked for 2 years. Like, it's that post-peak come down. And now I'm going to talk about shows that should have been movies and movies that should have been shows. Because there were so many times where it was clear the shows they made them in the format of a movie, and they felt like films stretched over like 7 hours. So the most obvious one, in my opinion, The Eternals needed to be a show. Even if that means you don't get Chloe Zhao, you have to accept that. There are too many characters and too many stories to be told to fit into one fucking movie. The Eternals should have been the biggest budget show they've ever done. They should have fully rolled out the red carpet for some director to come in and do like a prestige television Eternal season, where you go through times of history visiting with different Eternals, and like Icarus is the Nick Fury going around and collecting them. There was so much there, and I honestly didn't even hate the movie, but because of how poorly received it was, we'll never see those characters again. So Eternals obviously should have been a show. Now, for something that was a show that should have been a movie, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Falcon and the Winter Soldier should have been Captain America 4. That should have been Captain America and the Winter Soldier, which is what, at the end of that show, they changed the title card to say Captain America and the Winter Soldier because he was no longer Falcon. That should have been a movie with Isaiah Bradley and racial tensions. They didn't even address that as much as I hoped they would in the show, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. The stuff they went into about race was by far the best stuff they did in that show. When that cop stops Sam on the sidewalk and tries to fucking fight him, and Bucky has to stand up for him. When Elijah is his grandson, who is a future Captain America. Everything about that would have been better as a movie. And then Brave New World becomes Captain America 5, and Anthony Mackie gets multiple Cap movies under his belt. And now another show that should have been a movie, Moon Knight. Moon Knight, I love. To me, it's a top 3 or 4 MCU show, but I also have a pretty strong amount of criticism for it. I thought the amount of time we spent with Steven in the first half of the show was excessive, and kind of, it was like you were stuck in the altars of Moon Knight. We were stuck in the most boring, the least exciting, the least magical. And I get why they were doing it. They wanted Steven to be like the audience perspective, the what the hell is going on around me? But if it wasn't for Oscar Isaac's breathtaking performance, I think Steven would have grinded on us a lot. And because Oscar Isaac is maybe the best actor they've ever cast in this universe, it was breathtaking. I also think something that bothered me about Moon Knight that I wish they did and would have been cool if it was in the movie, when they cut away from Mark and Steven and Jake Lockley took over, we should have seen those fucking moments. Imagine if in a movie, right, when the fucking thing goes down in the window and Jake Lockley looks back, it triggered a flashback to the moments where neither Steven or Mark were present, and it shows us Jake Lockley, Moon Knight, killing all of those people in the most brutal ways we've ever seen. And then Jake Lockley is like this massive villain, loose in Marvel, with the power of Khonshu, and you don't know if Steven or Mark are ever going to have control of the body again. There was a lot more to be done there if Moon Knight was a movie, in my opinion. And then lastly, I talked about it already, but Secret Invasion should have been a massive movie. It should have been Avengers Secret Invasion. It should have established who the Avengers and the MCU were at that point. It could have started to show us the idea of the Thunderbolts and how whatever happens in this movie would have led to the need for an off-the-books Avengers team. But Secret Invasion was so bad as a show and as a property. It's crazy because Secret Invasion is like this massive story, and it should have been a phase concluding project. And then I'm going to give you just a couple ones on the way out here. No Shang-Chi sequel. Dumb. There should already be a third Shang-Chi movie in development. Ant-Man beating Kang. One of the dumbest things I've ever seen in any movie, breaking the comic book genre. If you're going to establish a new villain, you cannot have a C-level character like Ant-Man defeat him. And Quantumania as a whole was just awful. There was a lot of rewrites, apparently, and the ending of the movie made it feel like they shot it where it looked like Scott was stuck in like a fake reality, because in the final scene of the movie, which they shot the week it was released, let that process. The week a movie releases, they're calling people in for reshoots. When Scott is walking down the street and he's like, wait, I did save everybody, right? He did mention that everything would break. When Scott was having that inner monologue, there were extras walking past that were the same extras over and over and over, and they were all wearing green and purple. So I feel like that probably would have been integral to Doomsday, but because of what happened with Jonathan Majors, they just had to scrap it all. So, y'all, that is MCU Hot Takes version 1. Let me go one more time. Let me remind you, Spider-Man No Way Home is an overrated pile of shit. Multiverse of Madness is an awful white savior movie where they lied to us about the movie they were making and the movie they were presenting. The Illuminati was awful. Also, John Krasinski as Reed Richards is the worst fan cast ever. That guy can't act his way out of a paper bag. The multiverse was a misstep. They misfired by never having an Avengers movie in that saga. Guardians 2 is woefully overrated. I didn't mention this, but Thor 4 is dog shit. And then I talked about movies and shows that should have been flipped. So, y'all, give me your MCU hot takes below. Let me know what you think of my hot takes. Are you a No Way Home defender? Did you enjoy Multiverse of Madness? Let me know down below. Give me your MCU hot takes, and I'll mention them in the next part of this series. The Goose is out.